Hello everyone, welcome back. This is Venturous1V with another video. In this video I'm going to cover the advantages and disadvantages of the various saber types in saber combat that you'll see. Now each one I'm going to be talking about obviously will have its pros and cons. I'm going to try to cover 4 different types: single saber, staff, or what many people think of as a double-bladed saber, dual sabers, and then saber pike. Okay, I'm going to be going through each of those, talking about which one is effective against what kind of things, what they're weak against, that kind of thing. I'm going to start with the single saber. This is the classic one you'll see a lot in saber combat. I would say the pro of the single saber is its versatility, and I may have mentioned that in previous videos, but the single saber has a lot going for it. You can use it one-handed, okay? You can use it two-handed. You can use it in reverse grip. Some people I know aren't really comfortable in reverse grip, and reverse grip is one of those things where if you can pick it up, it's one more thing that you can add to your repertoire. Sometimes you'll see people that they'll start in standard grip, and they'll quickly switch to reverse grip to kind of throw off their opponent. That's kind of a nice thing to do. It does give you some extra options. Okay, and so that's the main pro of the single saber. It's very versatile. You can use it one-handed, two-handed. It's very strong in its strikes because you have that extra leverage behind it. And doubling that, it's also very strong in its blocks because, again, you have that extra leverage. So if your opponent is striking you, you have a lot of leverage in that block. Okay. Those are the pros of the single saber. Now, what's its disadvantages? The main disadvantage of the single saber is its defense. Now, especially if you're going up against, a double-bladed saber or dual sabers, you essentially have to work extra double hard in your defense because you have 2 blades to contend with as opposed to just one. So basically you're automatically at a disadvantage with a single saber if you go up against more than one saber because you have multiple areas to cover now instead of just one if you're going up against another single saber. Okay, so that's the single saber. Next we'll talk about the staff. Okay, next is the staff, or what some people might call the double-bladed saber. The actual weapon itself is probably more in line with a double-bladed saber as opposed to a saber staff, because typically in martial arts when you think of a staff, you're typically thinking of a weapon that you can actually hold down on the actual ends. And if we're going by the rules of lightsabers, then you can't really do that on this kind of weapon. So this would be more an actual double-bladed saber as opposed to a saber staff, but some people know it by that name, so that's what we're going to call it here. Now, this weapon actually has 2 main advantages, and one of which is its actual defense. Okay, now I wouldn't say this is a very strong weapon in terms of defense, but if you can take advantage of how to use it defensively, it can be a very strong weapon. This is not a weapon you want to use strength-based blocks for, okay? So let's say someone is, striking at my head. I'm not going to want to go for a strength-based block. Now the reason for that is, if I do that, I'm essentially wasting this other blade. The main advantage of this comes with deflection-based blocks, because if you can take advantage of that, if someone's striking my head at the same area, if I deflect that strike, pushing their blade away, I can immediately come in with that other blade for an attack of my own. Okay. Same would be with like an overhead attack. If I'm just going for that strength-based block, this blade is completely useless. If I deflect that strike, there's my attack. So if you can learn that, if you can take advantage of that with a staff, then you really have a powerful weapon, because you're essentially immediately counter-striking your opponent, okay? So that's one advantage of the staff. Now, another advantage is often misinterpreted or I don't know what you would call it, but people usually get the other advantage wrong. A lot of people will say one advantage of this weapon is its reach, and that is actually not true. Even though you do have a longer hilt, you're not gaining that much reach over your opponent. And I'll illustrate that. If I take that single saber, now obviously this does have a longer blade in it, but hopefully this will illustrate it to you. If I hold at the very end of this single saber and the very end of this staff hilt, you can see I'm really not gaining that much length, okay? Maybe an inch, if that, okay? So there's really not going to be a lot of reach advantage to this weapon. Now, the other advantage of this weapon is, again, that extra blade with your attacks, okay? This is especially true if you're going up against a single saber, because essentially they have to work twice as hard to defend against your extra blade, okay? So any kind of motion like this, where you're coming side to side, you know, where you're following one blade after the other in different directions, that's where the main advantage will be with this weapon, is that extra attack. Because if you have any kind of speed, you know, your opponent's basically going to be on the defensive the entire time, trying to keep up with you. Now, that's less likely the case if you're going up against another staff or dual sabers, because in that case, your opponent has an extra blade that they can defend with. So that advantage will come more with facing off against someone using a single saber. So those are the advantages of the staff, is that extra blade and the ability to pretty much instantly counterattack. Now, the main disadvantage of this weapon is obviously the hilt. In pretty much any kind of lightsaber combat now, if you're playing by the rules, this is one big target, okay? If you present this at all to an opponent, you're pretty much done, okay? You also have a little bit limited range to block with these. You kind of have to pull back a little bit to do the same kind of blocks that you would with a single saber. But that's the main advantage, is this massive target right here. Now, some people will try to get over that, saying well, this is a material that can't be cut. You know, there again, it's just one big target, okay? So if at any point your opponent hits this, that's pretty much game over, okay? So that's the staff, or the double-bladed saber. Next we'll talk about dual sabers. Okay, next up is dual sabers. And with this weapon, you'll find that if you can use it, if you can learn how to use it and you can use it effectively, this becomes an extremely powerful weapon. Obviously, the main advantage of this weapon is because you have two of them. Now, this is going to vary slightly from the saber staff, because now your weapons are working independently of each other, whereas in a saber staff, it was connected. So that meant if you attack with one blade, your other blade is basically out of commission until you retreat the other blade. Whereas with these, you can actually come in with both blades at the same time. And that is the main advantage of this weapon type. Now, there is actually two ways of using these weapons, or this weapon style, I should say. The first is doing basically what I just did there, where you're coming in at, you know, two strikes at the same time, forcing your opponent either to get out of the way or to be extremely fast in their defense. Now, if you employ that kind of style and you come in, you know, multiple directions at the same time, you know, that's good for putting your opponent on the defense, but at the same time, if you do that, you're leaving yourself a massive target at the same time, okay? Like if I come in with that double strike right there, you know, however I do that, my entire body becomes a target. So if I don't get to my opponent in time, I'm already struck. that's one kind of style of using these. The other style is actually keeping one back for defense and keeping the other forward for attack. You know, so you're actually using one all for attack and one for defense. Now you can occasionally switch that up, you know, so you're always holding one back for defense and you're always using one for striking. That's kind of more of a, what should I say? That's more of the, that's not a style you see as much, I will say. A lot of people, when they get the double sabers, you know, they want to start coming in, you know, sabers blazing, trying to hit their opponent. Even though it is a little bit smarter to kind of hold one back for defense as you're trying to hit the opponent. That can also lead to a lot of counterattacks. You know, if someone's striking you, you can block and strike at the same time, as opposed to the staff where you had to deflect and then strike. This way, with these weapons, you can actually do both at the same time, okay? So, honestly, the only disadvantage of this weapon I can think of is if you're coming in at the same time with both sabers, then you're actually leaving yourself open to attack. Other than that, these really don't present that much of a disadvantage because since they're independent of each other, you can actually use both in standard grip, both in reverse grip, or one in standard, one in reverse. So these become very versatile as well as with the single saber, okay? So that is dual sabers. If you can learn to use these become a very, very strong weapon. Next up, I'll talk about the saber pike. I'll tell you about that one. Okay, last but not least is the saber pike. This is a weapon you probably have not seen used a lot. I personally have never seen it used a lot. And it really only has one advantage, and that is its reach. This weapon is actually the longest weapon you can get as far as reach is concerned, because you can actually use this as a proper staff, as you would see like in martial arts, because you can actually grip down to the very edge of the weapon itself, whereas in a saber staff, or what they call a saber staff, it's actually a double-bladed saber. You have to hold more towards the middle, so you're losing that extra reach. With this weapon, the blade is only on one side, so you can actually get very far down on the reach, so you can get a massive advantage over your opponent in terms of reach. At the same time, you have a massive target right here, okay? And again, like I said with the saber staff, if you're playing by the rules in lightsaber combat, if this is hit at all, then your weapon is kind of out of commission. You can get these in any kind of length that you want. This particular one is an Ultra Sabers, and these are called Yari extensions. You can get as many of these as you want and make as long of a pike as you want. Obviously, the longer you make it, the farther your reach is, but there again, the longer you make it, the longer of target you have. Likewise, conversely, you can also get different lengths of blades. This particular setup is one Yari extension, 2 couplers, and my initiate hilt with an initiate blade. Okay, so roughly that's going to come probably 4 feet 8 inches, something like that. Obviously, you can get these much taller than you can get them much shorter than you, but I think something in this range is probably a good range to stick with because it doesn't encumber you that much. You know, you can get in and get in quickly and get out quickly. But that's really the only main advantage of this weapon is its reach. I would say it has more disadvantages than advantages, so that's probably why you don't see this one employed a lot. But if you can actually master this weapon, if you can get in quick and get out to keep this from being too much of a target for very long, it does become a pretty powerful weapon because you do have that extra reach that you can use. Okay, so that is the different way. That is the different saber types. That is their pros and cons. Hopefully, I've clarified a few things on this. Hopefully, I've brought some things to your attention that you didn't normally think of. And if anyone has any other weapon types that they think of that I haven't covered here, please let me know, and I'll see if I can do a video on those as well. Okay? Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.